Welcome to Connoisseur Conversations with a.lange and Söhne. My name is Peter Wallman and I'm going to be your host this morning for what we hope will be a lively session of conversation, a bit of debate. I have some extremely important guests with me, but first of all I'd just like to talk about the setting. We're here for the Concorso deleganza 2021. We're here at the wonderful and supremely beautiful Villa d'Este on the shore of Lake Como. As you can see, they've moved the lake into the sky and we're having a little bit of a noise from the rain coming down. But for early October, it's been a beautiful 2 days and we've had very, very lovely weather. We are at some point going out in some open cars to drive, so we may as well get used to the rain now. But the subject for today's conversation is the joy of collecting. But also we'd like to talk a little bit about not just the joy of collection, but also how speculation and investment has started to get a grip on this area, not just with cars, but watches and all other areas. And I have three wonderful guests with me, starting off firstly with the lovely Annette Abaci. Annette is an old friend of mine and has spent many years in this world of collecting motor cars, and also Annette is responsible for many of the fine cars that we have with us today, being on the selection committee. So welcome, Annette. Very good to see you.
Thank you.
With Annette, we have Dr. Thomas Tischler from BMW Group Classic Services.
Thank you.
Very nice of you to join us. And on my left, we have the highly affable, elegant and dynamic Mr. Wilhelm Schmid from the CEO of a.lange and Söhne.
You're setting the benchmark very high.
Well, I'm telling the truth. Very good to see you. So thank you all for joining us. And now we should start talking about the joys of collecting. I have a sense that we're all born with a natural desire for beauty and a feeling for collecting. And where I get that from is I think about children on a beach. First time they walk on the beach, they naturally pick up pebbles and they pick up shells, and then they start to pick them up of a similar size. And then they give them to their parents to put in their pockets and we have to waddle home with them. But they may line them up on the shelves at home. So let's start with Annette, ladies first again. Did you collect anything as a younger lady?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm delighted. And in fact, yes, speaking of muscles, I used really to, like being 4 years old, 5 years max, just walk on the beach. And I remember my parents being very upset with me because I would just collect mussels, not looking right and left, not looking where everybody else was, and getting lost by doing so. So I was very happy having my muscles with me, and everybody else was in a huffle and puffle because I got lost. Second thing I love to collect, and I still like very much, which is a bit embarrassing, but I'm sharing this with you anyway, is collecting marbles. Like, you know, it's like I don't know if you still do this, but when I was young, which is not so long ago, as we might know, it's like there were marbles and they had all different colors, and there was a game you would play.
Yes,
and
flipping.
I was the queen of marbles, if I may say so. So yes, I did collect.
You did, and it's good to know you haven't lost your marbles. Dr. Tischler,
That's a good one.
how about you, sir?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. Thank you very much for the invitation. I really have two things which I really collected. On the one hand, being still today a supporter of Bayern Munich. It's into my grandfather, who was in this football and area active as a referee. I get to know a lot of very well-known people, and so I had really the chance to collect all the autographs from them. So I have really still today a collection of Bayern Munich and other players, autographs, Beckenbauer, Müller, Meyer, and also soccer balls at home. So this is the one passion I really kept, and also with other sportsmen like Ingemar Stenmark for ski racing and so forth. I still do that. Right. And on the other hand, and this is my passion still up to date, is cars, and I collected Matchbox cars. And I also still have them. They're also with numbers on, like here on the Villa d'Este, and they're still in the family, so it's true.
Let's hear you now.
I think I was more a hunter than a collector, to be honest. We always had a great passion in going out. You know, internet didn't exist. That's how old I am, unfortunately. And I'll never forget, we collected frogs. and I brought a whole bowl full of frogs and I put it into the kitchen. My mum was delighted, specifically after she realized that a few frogs escaped. About 15 years later, the kitchen was changed, and believe it or not, they found a skeleton of a frog underneath one of these things, and we know exactly who brought it there. Other than that, I'm similar. We had a Carrera miniature race, you know, and my dad is a car dealer, so we had a big room. I think it was about 15 meters. And the biggest joy for us going there, I had a Lola with 2 engines, and the one engine was hidden a little bit. So that thing was really quick until they realized that I was cheating. So it was disqualified, unfortunately.
So I think that's a great start. I mean, I think if we're talking about the joy of collecting, we've found out where it begins. And now we grow up, we start to earn some money, and we start to look at how we can collect other things. And we're obviously here at Villa d'Este, we're surrounded by some of the finest motor cars in the world. Thank you to all of you, and of course watches, 2 areas of collecting. But I'd like to ask really whether we think collecting is for the experience, the culture, the shared passion and the beauty, which probably argues for the joys of collecting, or the rarity, the purity, and let's, I suppose, say the investment potential. And can the two live harmoniously together, investing and collecting, or do they clash? I'll start with Mr. Schmid.
I think they clash. And I honestly mean that, and that's why we see this disruption in the market. First of all, I think collecting goes hand in hand with expertise. You don't just collect something, you gain knowledge, you make yourself familiar with it, and then you meander from where you start to your higher levels. You do that with passion, unless, I mean, that's the sage way for people that only invest. You go for very good consultant. That might take, but is that the same? You know, we very clearly defined for us as a company that we want predominantly to work and produce watches and build watches for those people that really enjoy watches. It's hard to distinguish, to be honest, because there's not a sign I'm an investor or I'm a passionate collector, so you need to find out. But generally speaking, the investors are good for resale value, but the passion is good for the real hero watches or cars of tomorrow. Because if it's pure investment, the passion is lost. And I don't think what we see here is the idea of investors, specifically if you look at these cars. I think this is it's a passion of love and not of investment.
Well, you of course enjoy driving your cars, and I think you're
love
about
it.
to go out in the rain quite soon today. And Annette, I mean, we've known each other a long time. You're one of the few ladies in the car world, especially at the level that you operate. And what I mean by that is I've known you for many years as a driver of your cars. You used to race, you really use, and you bought may I say, your pre-war car. You know, you have a fantastic Invictulo chassis, which is a proper muscular pre-war car, big engine, long bonnet, it's heavy to drive, and you've toured all around the world with that. So I think, you know, your investment is clearly in your passion.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and can I just answer to what you're saying?
Yes.
It's interesting what you noticed and said, and I personally have a slightly different view on that, because I truly think that it starts with passion to begin with. It starts with passion, and I know a lot of very high-end collectors who started by just collecting what they like. Having said that, they paid a high price for that. They refined their collection, and now it's passion as well as investment. And I like the way how you kind of like we develop our passion. So you start with something like being like super excited. I mean, speaking of myself, I remember when I was first here, like I wasn't involved that like business-wise in the car hobby. I came here with a friend who lives here around the corner. He had a boat here. I waltzed in. I didn't even know there was a Concours. I looked at these cars. I literally walk up to an Invicta S-Type. No idea what brand it is. No, like not knowing anything of anything. And I'm like, I like this car. The gentleman then thought I'm hitting on him, which I didn't. I was really interested in the car. And some 15 or 18 years later, I had the luck to buy a car like this. And I'm telling you this because I think it's quite interesting. You see something like literally a beautiful watch as well.
You're absolutely right.
You have your, if I may say so, something like a Swatch watch, which is cool, which is funky.
Yeah.
And then you see something, you just pass by and you're like, wow, what is that? What brand is that? This is a Lange. Okay, I want to have that. Then you look at the price, you're like, maybe I tone it down. But it keeps in the back of your head. And you know this. I mean, we had those discussions before. And I think that's a beauty of it. And once you're in a position financially, you're like, oh, you know what? I really like this watch. I really like this car. Maybe I can have a better model. And then when you start that, you get into it. And then, of course, you being clever, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to afford the watch or the car. You're like, oh, maybe I use it as an investment. Maybe there is another twist on it. So that's what I love about it.
It perhaps comes Dr. Tischler, to your collecting autographs and things as a young man. You exchange, you trade up, you say, I've got two of these, so that type of investment perhaps is more appropriate.
This is, and what we experience at BMW Group Classic, we have three of these kinds of collectors. On the one hand, of course, the enthusiasts, the passion, where they want to collect the cars because they love it. On the other hand, we have, I agree with that, we have pure investment where family office approach us and so forth and decide for special cars, of course. But then it's very interesting when they get into it, and especially also the investment point of view supports facts like originality, documentation, not touching the car when it's very original because you would spoil it in any way. And then through the investment, we found out sometimes the investor says, oh, it's super, it's very interesting coming to these events and being hooked on or getting fire on. And then they really experience, oh, that's great. I want to have another one and another one. And I'm very interested in that special edition of the car. So from that point of view, they mingle a little bit. But it's in the long run, I think it's very important to keep all the facts of originality and collectmanship, if you put it that way, and move forward on that. Because if you're just a pure investor, I'm with you, the community of these very gentle people and collectors, they will not accept that. I'm sure with you.
And I guess as well, I mean, when we talk about events, driving events such as Villa d'Este, be it raining or not, it doesn't matter, it's still beautiful. Buying the cars, and in particular, is a passport to these events. You know, you buy the car because you want to do a race meeting, a rally, or you want to come and show it at an event, or just drive to your golf club. But Mr. Schmid, when it comes to watches, I suppose that aspect is less present, but collecting watches is still a very, very enthusiastic hobby. And I think in the last 5 years, it seems to have grown exponentially, I should say.
Again, I think that collector gene is in all of us, and I totally agree with, it's not two groups, it's the question of what part is passion and what part is cleverness, because you don't want to waste your money on something which is worth nothing tomorrow. I totally agree on this, and maybe those people that have a good mixture, they will enjoy, but they also enjoy that they don't waste their money. Maybe that's a good analogy, because you will not hardly find any pure collector that doesn't care about resale value, nor will you find an investor that's not attracted to some extent by what he or she is buying. Collecting watches is a lot more for yourself than for the public, I have to say, because simply because of the size of the object. A car is big, That's why we have that big Odysseus watch at the Villa d'Este, because we realized if you want to be recognized in a car event, you better bring up something with that size. Otherwise, that's a small real estate and small compared to these cars. The one thing they have in common is, and you realize that when you go along these beautiful cars, is the mechanical aspect. That's why we have quite a few collectors that say, can't you build the watches so that I can wear the movement on the top and not the dial, because we always emphasize on, we call that the two souls, a very subtle, understated dial, but then the opulence of the movement of the mechanics presented, but to the owner, not to the public.
Yeah.
Collecting watches, again, there are two elements to it, I think. As much as I like your approach of vintage, I don't live from that, and today's watches will be tomorrow vintage watches. People always say there's a vintage. That doesn't work, because if we stop producing watches today, or you stop producing cars today, there will be not a show like that with, let's say, iconic cars or watches from that era, because we wouldn't produce. That's a big difference, by the way, with collecting cars like this, because that's history, and collecting watches that you can buy new. That's a very different topic in a way. You would disagree?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think there is a connection. For example, I think the cars and the car hobbies live from the heritage as well.
Yes.
So look at the BMW 328.
That's why they're here.
And look at the new models as well. So it's like, I think the old cars are substantial to the success of the new cars. The racing is substantial to the success of the new cars. Same with you. If you wouldn't be you, if I may say so, like you as Mr. Lange & Söhne brand sitting here with us, if you wouldn't have like lovely old watches, I think it would be not as easy to place the brand, because it's like, I'm driving a Rolls Royce. I'm not, but if I would drive a Rolls Royce, I'm like, oh, look at 10EX. This is like a car from 1920 something, and I have the new generation. So there is like this lovely lane. Or think of Bentley as well. And I think this is, as well as, again, I see your point, and this is very smart.
I think it's proof of concept.
Yeah,
because they've been around for a long time. They've been successful in the past. What seemed to be very expensive as bought new today is a lot more expensive. So it's a proof of the concept, and of course that gives you trust and faith into a brand, be that car or watches. And therefore, you look, I did it 20 years ago, and look how it has developed. So I can do it again, because I know for sure it'll go a similar way. So in that, I totally agree. I just wanted to distinguish between collecting things that are unique. Most of these cars are unique, and they are old. You can't replicate that. To you start collecting watches or cars. I'm not familiar with collecting new cars. I'm better in vintage cars, but I'm quite familiar with collecting new watches. If you ask my wife, far too good, if you know what I mean. So I think that's a different perspective. But again, I think you can't, as a brand, you need to have a track record. Let me put it this way. Otherwise, who will trust you that what you say, that promise, brand for me is a promise, is it something that you kept in the past?
Well, I think that's a good segue into the next question I'd like to pose, which is, I wonder whether we talked about investment. I'd like to bring you in on this first, Dr. Tischler. We talk about investment, and we talk about hoping, as you say, that what we've spent our well-earned money on will have a future value. But I wonder whether we're also trying to de-risk it too much with information technology, because I feel that collecting traditionally was perhaps, and this is happening in the art world in the way that they're barcoding paintings to eliminate fakes, they're looking at prices, they're looking at indices, all sorts of things. And of course with BMW and other major manufacturers becoming much closer to their heritage. Now I can come to BMW and find out all about my car's heritage, but there was some eccentricity to collecting and perhaps a little bit of of a gamble about it. And if we de-risk it too much, are we sort of making it too logical, too practical, and removing that goal of I've got the knowledge, I'm not sharing it with anybody, because it's all shared now?
Yeah, very good question. I think if we use the modern technology, if you use digitalization and all these kind of stuff very properly to support collecting activities, I think that helps us a lot, also documenting and not overdoing it, and also using and preserving it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, because look at in our archives, for example, we have the original books at BMW Group Classic, where you mentioned the 328, where we can see, okay, this is the VIN number, and here the car went to Hamburg in 1938. So this is the originality, but of course we have to digitalize that for the future and keep that. So I think if you use modern technology also to look at the cars and the originality, all this kind of stuff, if you use it properly, I think it's the right way, but not overdoing it, of course.
How about you, Annette? I mean, how much is instinctive? I mean, you have a lot of experience, you've worked for an auction house, you've bought and sold cars yourself, so you obviously have an instinctive view to that, but do you prefer to refer to that and your private network of contacts, or do you sort of scour the internet to make sure you tick every box?
You know what? Unfortunately, I know everything I know, and when it comes to something I really like, unfortunately I go by my feelings and by my emotions. And to be frank, I paid some how do I put this? But I learned my lessons the hard way, but I'm still not really learning. So whenever I'm like, oh, what is this? I have the tendency, like, oh, I know this guy, I trust him. Do I do my due diligence? Nah, I know my stuff. I don't need to research. I go for it, and it just happened like end of last year. And I'm like, oh man.
So it's an adrenaline purchase.
It's like, yes, it is. However, every time I do this, I'm like, okay, this has to stop. But even if you know the history, and maybe you can confirm that, maybe if you know what's in there, it's old, things can happen. If it's like matching this, matching that, just has taken his MOT test, whatever it is, you drive it, and then like after 50 kilometers you break down. And it's not a massive thing, it's maybe the fuel pump, that's like something wrong with it, but you have to live with that. Yeah. And every time I'm like on the side of the road, which happens on a regular basis, you're like, really? Am I learning? Can I just not bring the car to a mechanic who looks through, and I'm like, no, it's all good. So it's a bit of that. However, I know 10 times more people who do the proper research, which I think you should do these days. And then actually, and this is my advice to everybody I know, buy the car, it's lovely, it ticks all the boxes, and then please bring it to somebody who knows about it, have it inspected, and then you will have a lot of fun. I don't do it.
And I guess
Sorry
in the watch world...
You're in good company, it always happens to me, and regardless whether it's a totally restored car, I realized whatever I do, it takes 2 years before a car is really my car. I know all the shortcomings, I know how it works, I know if it breaks down what I have to do. And you're in good. I think if you go for an old car, you just have to accept they were done in times where the normal service interval was about 2,000 kilometers.
Yeah,
so you should not be surprised if they don't have the longevity of a modern car.
And you know what?
And it happens all the time.
And it grows on you. Like, I have cars, I'm like, I really don't like to drive it anymore, but I can't part with it because, you know what, we had this experience and then what that, and then we met these people who helped me, I could stay with it.
You're so right.
And this is part, and this is interesting, it's very emotional, but it's part of the history of the car.
You had, you know, as I said, you don't only have sunny days, as you can clearly see today. And I think with any object, if it is linked with the good and the bad, and often think about it, the good happens after the bad, because you break down and you fix it and you're so proud, or you know, you just have a great experience. But there's a chapter in your mind which would set it apart from a car which I would call sort of the trailer queen. In our world, is these watches that are still double sealed. You know, I mean, they've never seen a wrist in their life. They're in a safe. That's where they live. And a car that, or a watch that you use or wear. You know, you have to live with it. You know, there will be scratches and dents. There will be breakdowns, and you will smell, as my wife always says, when I come back from work in an old car, she always said, "You smell like an old car, but you look younger." So how can I not do that?
Well, I think in summary, I think we've had our 30 minutes, and in summary, I think I would deduce from this conversation, we're all very enthusiastic collectors. The joy of collecting probably is much higher than the investment potential, although obviously we have to check that box. And clearly, from your youth, you were mad as a box of frogs. You lost your marbles, and you were the smart one because you've still got all those wonderful autographs that may come up for auction one day. So again,
well, the clever, the too passionate.
Yes, and thank you, Peter, for
wonderful talk. Yes,
talking us through this. It has been a pleasure, really fun and entertaining.
It was a lot of fun.
Great fun, and look forward to wandering around under an umbrella later. Well, that's the Connoisseur Conversation from Villa d'Este. Thank you.